So this video is a video I have been avoiding for quite some time. You wouldn't think so. What we're going to talk about today is how we clean our sponge filters, so stay tuned. Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and yes, today we are going to be talking about how we clean our sponge filters. You wouldn't think that could be a controversial topic, but the way we do it, it's a little different, and we're going to show you how it's done. So we've recently done a couple videos about filtration. One of them was how much filtration do you actually need. I will put that card in the upper right hand corner. We also recently went to lrbaquatics.com, his fish room, Lucas Brett's, and what was interesting is how little filtration, traditional filtration, he's actually using. Again, I will put that card in the upper right hand corner in case you haven't seen that. But if you really want to start thinking about the amount of filtration you actually need, those two videos will give you something to think about. So usually what the boys do is they'll pull all the sponge filters out of the tanks before we go ahead and clean them out. So we can see one small little bucket here, but usually the floor is just kind of lined up with buckets, and I wind up doing all the sponge filter cleaning. So let's take a look at how we do that. Alright, so I'm going to put the bucket over here on the ledge. Now this is going to be the shocking part, and we have never ever had an issue doing this. Keep in mind that we clean sponge filters every single week in every single tank, and we have multiple sponge filters in a tank, so we're cleaning somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75 sponge filters every single week. And the way we do it, we turn on our fully chlorinated full tap water right out of the sink, and I generally just use cold water. I don't like to use warm water, and we go ahead and I will very gently kind of go through and rub off any of the slime or anything that's on there. And you can see here, let's see if we can get a little better thing going on here. And then I just kind of gently pat it along the ground, like so, on the bottom of the sink. And we make sure that, you know, the brown stuff for the most part is off. And you can see here, this sponge filter is mostly done. And so as I clean them, I just kind of set them to the side, and I do this for the entire fish room. And you may be wondering, well, you've heard before that you cannot clean your sponges in tap water. It's going to kill all the beneficial bacteria. You're going to restart your cycle. You're going to get an ammonia spike or a nitrite. You're going to have all kinds of issues. And I can tell you that by doing this with all of our tanks, and right now we've got close to 60 tanks, and like I said, 70 to 75 sponge filters. We clean all the sponge filters in all the tanks, so it's not like we leave one in the cycle, or one dirty and one clean, and tanks where we have multiple sponge filters. We clean them all, and not once, and I've tested it before, not once have we ever had an ammonia spike or nitrite or any kind of issues. And I've gone so far as to test it day one, and then I usually go skip a day, day 3. And I've tested it a week later, and then by a week later we're starting the process all over again, because we literally do this every single week. And so I'm just squeezing these things out very gently, because I don't want to really ruin the sponges. If you've got cheaper sponges, squeezing them too hard, it might start to deform them over time and cause issues. But we've never had an issue doing this, and the reason I believe this is probably not an issue is if you're just cleaning them in the tap water for as long as we are, a few minutes, and you're just getting out all the gunk. You can see these aren't very dirty because we did them a week ago. And that's the key to keeping sponge filters doing their job, at least mechanically, because they're not super awesome at mechanical filtration, but if you keep them clean, they will do a decent job of mechanical filtration. But I think this is the key. It doesn't kill all the beneficial bacteria. Is it going to kill some because of the chlorine? Maybe. But what we wind up with is more surface area for beneficial bacteria to grow, because if you wipe some of them out, you're going to create surface area. They're going to start populating that area pretty fast. And because the beneficial bacteria is in other parts of the tank, the plants, the wood, the substrate, we don't have any issues. Now, when it comes to cleaning sponge filters, a couple things. I know some questions immediately pop up in your head. One, we've been doing this, as I've mentioned, for years, and we've got a really huge sample size. So it's not like we've done this once and said, oh, you know what, it works, it seems like it's going to be okay. Thing number one, I've tested for ammonia. I've tested for nitrites after we did it, because I was worried the chlorine would kill the microbes, and guess what? Never had an issue. So you may be thinking, well, you know what, you've got a lot of plants in your fish room. Maybe the plants are compensating for it, but it would be a really bad idea in a non-planted tank. Fine, I could see that. Let's take a look at the 125. The 125 is a very heavily stocked tank. We've got the Oscar, we've got the Tilapia. At one point, if you look at some of our past videos, that tank was filled with OB juveniles, the OB adults, the Geophagus. In other words, it was a very heavily stocked tank, and the filtration we had in there, 3 sponge filters, a hang on the back. But guess what? Every single week, we clean all 3 of those sponge filters in tap water. We change out the filter pads every other week, so at least every other week, all the filtration is getting completely clean. Never had a problem. Never had a problem with ammonia. Never had a problem with nitrite. And yes, I've tested it, and we do it week after week after week for years. Now, granted, there was a small piece of pothos on that 125, and maybe that is the magic solution. The pothos made sure that there was no ammonia, no nitrites. If you didn't have the pothos in there, you'd have a big problem. The 150 is stocked, again, heavily stocked. It's got the tinfoil barbs, the ballast sharks, all kinds of different cichlids. It's always been a heavily stocked tank, and there isn't anything in it. There's no pothos, there's no plants. It's very little algae, and yet, once again, the 2 sponge filters in there get cleaned with tap water every single week. They hang on the back filter, gets cleaned every other week with new filter pads, and yet nothing happens. All right, so what if you've got a tank or a grow out bin and all it is the filter, the sponge filter, and it's just fish, the filter, and no substrate, and so the only opportunity for microbes to grow is going to be on the perimeter of that glass or the tote or whatever you've got. We have the same thing going on in our fish room. We do clean that sponge filter with tap water as well, although this is the one area where I would exercise a little bit of caution. If that has worked for us, that's something, again, you might want to use a little bit of caution. If you've got a completely bare tank and a sponge filter is just throwing that in tap water, it may not work for you. So here's my point. Point number 1 is you have to think about what we're doing in our fish room. Is we are taking fully cycled sponge filters and introducing them to new tanks at the beginning. So we recently set up a couple tanks you have not yet seen, but you will pretty soon, and in those tanks we had cycled filter media. If I were setting up a new tank with a sponge filter, that sponge filter would be cycled, and I probably wouldn't clean that sponge filter for a few weeks, at least 3 or 4 weeks, because the tank would most likely be lightly stocked and it wouldn't need to be cleaned right away. So I would let the microbes grow for 3 or 4 weeks before I ever even touched it. Then, right into the sink it would go, week after week after week. Never had an issue. Again, big sample sizes. I'm not just saying, oh, we did this one time and we've never had any issues. We do this every single week, 4 years, with many, many sponge filters. Like I said, 70, 75. All right, everyone, I would love to hear from you. How do you clean sponge filters? Because the more I talk to people in our clubs, we have a lot of people with some big fish rooms, and they do the same thing sometimes where they just clean them right off in the tap water, and they too haven't had any issues. So if you found this video useful, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.